Right then, so there's my objectives. You can see this. What I will move on to now is obviously a recap on the AVBK exam. So as you all know, you are looking at 2 hours and there are 5 tasks. So you might think 5 hours, 2 hours, 5 tasks, 2 hours, lots of time. Not necessarily, because those tasks are broken into subtasks. So let's just have a look in a little bit more detail. So effectively, task 1 and 2 is all to do with non-current assets, where task 1 is all about understanding the non-current assets, whereby you have to complete the non-current asset register with acquisitions, disposals, and also calculating the depreciation charge. And on completing that particular task, it is 21 marks. Once again, task 2 is all about non-current assets, but this time it's focusing more on the double entry or dealing with general adjustments for acquisition. So, buy a new asset, what would those double entry be? If we had a disposal, so remember you've got full and part disposals, what would those journal entries be? And really importantly, the depreciation charge. What is the depreciation? But also understanding the rules in terms of disposals. So, is it full year depreciation, year of acquisition, and none in the year of disposal? Or are we looking at monthly depreciation? So that's, what to expect in task 2. And there are 17 marks. So as I've already mentioned, task 3 is where the accruals and the prepayments obviously sit. So you're looking at ledger accounting, which will include those famous accruals and prepayments, and also, in relation to expenditure and income. And also you do have you will have a question on ethical principles. So what to expect, and we're going to see this today. So you will be testing you on your double entry. They will expect you to take a list of items and be able to identify whether they're a debit or a credit within the TB. Also, how do you account for accruals and prepayments? So what is the charge of the expense account or the income account that you're going to put through to the profit and loss? It may include what the balance of the asset and liability could be in the financial position. So really, we need to know all of accruals and prepayments in able to answer any part that could come up in your exam. So in relation to task 3, you are looking at 19 marks. In task 4 then, you're also looking at preparing and processing accounting adjustments. So this predominantly focuses on your accounting period end adjustments. So yeah, accruals and prepayments could be depreciation, bad and doubtful debts, closing inventories, any of them. But also as well, there may be an error. As we all know, we do make errors, and the error could be straightforward in that we've posted it to the wrong nominal ledger and it's a straightforward correction. Or the error could actually create the TB not to balance, which means we then bring in the suspense account. So the question is how do we go about it? So that's what task 4 is about. And this has the greatest mark, which is 23 marks. And then finally, task 5, what we're looking at here are the period end routines and completing the TB. So basically, control account reconciliation. So it's the bank rec, maybe VAT, or you could be looking at your receivables and payables control account reconciliations. And then finally, it's dealing with completing that extended TB, so taking the balances in the TB, dealing with the necessary adjustments, and then carrying them through into the profit and loss columns or into the financial position. And then fingers crossed that the profit that you've calculated in the P&L columns follows through into the financial position, and it all balances. So in all, that's worth 20 marks. So the question is basically, how are you performing? And the examiner report, which is available to you all on my Kaplan, outlines each individual tasks, but also tells you how students are performing. So for myself, I'm going to really just focus on task 3, because that's what today is all about, is accruals and prepayments. So just very quickly, in terms of the examiner's report, the one thing that is absolutely fundamental to your success in AVBK is that you really need to know the knowledge of double entry bookkeeping. You need to know your debits from your credits, and when you're doing journal entries, what are you debiting and crediting, full stop. Okay then, so in terms of just quickly looking, tasks 1 and 5, so that's to do with the non-current asset register and dealing with the extended TB, strongest performance by all students. Task 1, 78% of students achieving that task. Task 5, 70%. Task 3 and 4 are the areas where most students struggle with. So task 3, this is the one with the accruals and prepayments in. And then task 4 is to do with the year-end adjustments and obviously dealing with the suspense count and errors. We're looking at 50% of students who are only passing those 2 tasks. So in terms of task 3 then, what are those common weaknesses? Where are students falling down? And I think this is really, really important, and I will keep reiterating as I'm going through the accruals and prepayments today, is this is what you need to watch out for, because this is where the students are falling down when they are completing the questions. So the first one is that students are not identifying the correct pro-rata adjustments that you are required to do when you're calculating your accruals and prepayments, okay? Or you're just simply not recognising there is one that you have to calculate. So when we talk about pro-rata adjustments, how many months do we need to accrue for in that financial period, or how many months has been prepaid and therefore relates to the next financial period. So that's key. It's the number of months. The key thing is year end. We need to know what the financial year end dates are to be able to do those calculations. The next thing then, it says not correctly calculating the income or expense charge that needs to be recognised in the TB. And it says it's usually the opening balance is overlooked. Now, I understand the opening balance, and we'll see this when we visit task 3 from the AAT sample assessment, and I can absolutely understand why students fall over that particular bit. But in relation to calculating the income expense, which we're going to transfer over to the statement of profit and loss, I've got no issues with that because I've got my little trick under my sleeve that obviously will help you. It takes all that conversation in your head where, oh, is that a debit side or is that on the credit side? So certainly I will reveal that later. The other thing is not identifying the correct dates for dealing with the reversing journals. So we'll certainly have a look at that. Not understanding how accrual or prepayments or its reversal affects the elements of the accounting equation. So I know the student posted something on Facebook about how things happen. So at the end, I'll just write a quick thing where, if we've got an accrual, that's obviously increasing liabilities. What's the effect of profit? That then affects capital. So I certainly will go through that at the end. And then finally, where does prepaid or accrued income sit within the TB? So hopefully, by these common weaknesses, I will answer these as I work through the tasks. So let's start with accruals first of all. Okay then, so, let me go to the top, sorry about that. So basically we're looking at accruals, and regardless of accruals and prepayments, the underlying principle that obviously is the driving point for this is the accruals concept. So my definition of accruals concept is that we need to match income and expenditure in the period it happens and not when cash exchanges hands. So let's think about the statement of profit and loss first of all. So we've got obviously income and expenditure. So let's have a look at income first. So we obviously prepare the statement of profit and loss on the basis of when the income is earned and not when cash exchanges hands. So, we will always recognise the income even though we've not been paid for it. So the classic example that we've got here is goods that are sold on credit. So effectively then, let me just get my pen up. Let me choose a colour. So we're looking at goods sold on credit. So what we're looking at here, double entry, is we will debit receivables because obviously we've not received the cash and we are therefore crediting the income. So we are recognising the revenue in the statement of the statement of P&L, even though we've not received it. And that's the accruals concept. So let's have a look at the expenditure. So it's exactly the same, but the opposite way around, is that we will prepare the statement of profit and loss and we will recognise expenditure when it has been incurred, okay? So we've got the goods or we've used those goods or services even though we've not paid for it. So classic example again is us buying goods on credit. So double entry in terms of that then is effectively we will be debiting purchases, and we will therefore be crediting payables. So yeah, so we can see once again, we are recognising the income and expenditure even though we may or may not have received the cash, and that is because of the accruals concept. Now, what we do need, or what I do need to point out though, is that, you know, obviously I've looked at sales and purchases, but really when we start to look at accruals and prepayments in a lot of detail, then actually this doesn't just apply to sales and purchases, but also can apply to other income and expenditure. So let's have a look at accrued expenses in a little bit more detail. So basically what we've got here, we have an expense, okay? And we have incurred that expense in the financial period, so in the financial year. But the problem is that we have not accounted for it. So in reality, when we're thinking about a business, it means that we've not received the invoice, because once we receive the invoice, we'll process it, and obviously it will then be updated to the nominal ledger. So we've used the expense, we've just not accounted for it. But the problem is we need to account for it because it relates to that financial period. So effectively, what we have to do is we have to account for it. So the classic examples that we see in day-to-day life is telephones. Okay, we're always using our telephones, maybe not the mobile bills because that tends to be on a monthly basis, but certainly your landlines, you know, and business telephones, you probably find that you get invoiced on a quarterly basis. Electricity, it comes up, usually it's on a quarterly basis, and the same with gas. Now, what is key to remember in reality, that a business might not know the exact amount of what they have used in that accounting period for what they've not received the invoice for. So it's really important to remember it's our best guesstimate, okay? So we don't have to get it spot on, but at least we've accounted for it in terms of making sure that our profit is a fair, realistic figure for what we think it is. So let's have a look then at example 1, okay? So what we've got here is that we have a business which has a year end of the 31st December 2019. So remember, examiner's report says that we're not very good at determining how many months we need to accrue or prepay for, and the key thing is what is the financial year end date. So we know we're looking at the 31st of December, okay? So the last electricity bill of £5,000 was received and paid during the year, and this covered the period from the 1st of January to the 31st of October 2019. So the question is we need to calculate the year-end accrual for the electricity expense. Now, I can't see the chat panel, so James is in charge of this. So if anybody's feeling daring, how many months do we need to account for within this financial year? So James, just give a couple of seconds waiting for the students to put their answers in, and if there's a common theme, let me know what the answer is.
Yeah, I will do. We'll just wait for those answers to start coming in. Okay, so we've got some answers coming in now.
Fantastic. Ooh, and everybody was thinking was going to have a nice hour of just watching. I'm making them do some work. How mean of me.
So the majority we're getting are 2 months, with a couple of people saying 10 months. 10 months.
Right, so I can see why you're saying both answers. So in terms of how many months we need to accrue, 2 months, fantastic. In terms of the 10 months, that's how many months we've already accounted for. So I'm happy with either answer. So let's have a look then. So if we're going to go from the 1st of January 2019 to the 31st of October 2019, we are looking at 10 months. So we've already accounted for 10 months for electricity, in our financial statements, okay? So that means we are going from the 1st of November 2019 to the 31st of December 2019. So we're looking at 2 months. So we need to put a charge, electricity charge, through the statement of profit and loss, obviously for the electricity we've used during that accounting period. So the question is we need to come up with a figure. And remember what I said, it doesn't have to be exact, but we've only been given so much information. So what I do know is we've got a charge of 5,000 for 10 months. So all I'm going to do here is effectively take that 5,000, I am going to divide that by 10 months, and hopefully, numbers in my head can be quite dangerous, I get a figure of 500. So I'm saying roughly £500 a month. Probably isn't true, because in summer you probably use less electricity. You know, the lights obviously we don't have to have them all the time and stuff, but you know, we're just giving our best guesstimate. So all I'm going to do now is work out what I think those 2 months charges are going to be for us to therefore account for it. So all I'm going to do here is take the 2 months, so the November and the December, and I'm just going to times it by the 500, and that will give me £1,000. Okay. So in terms of what's happening is I need to put an extra £1,000 into the electricity expense account. So all that's happening here is I am increasing the electricity expense. And if we're increasing our electricity expense, it will mean I need to debit. I will debit the electricity expense because I've increased it, I've used more electricity. In terms of the other side of the journal entry, well, I know at some point in the future I am going to get a bill. So I know I've got a liability because I'm going to owe that money as soon as that bill arrives. So effectively all that's happening here is I'm increasing my liability. Okay? And all that's happening here is if we're increasing liabilities, it will be a credit. So if you're unsure, there's different ways in which you can remember, you know, I used it and click, and I know increasing expense is obviously debit and an increase in liability is a credit. But, you know, I think there's pales around. So please go back to basics. It will help you in this exam. So in terms of the journal adjustment then, all I'm going to do here is debit the electricity expense. Excuse my handwriting, I'm not the best. For 1,000. And then I'm going to credit the accrued expenses. Okay, for 1,000. Now, this accrued expense, okay, is obviously a statement of financial position. And it is a current liability because we know we're going to have to pay for that electricity bill when it arrives within the next 12 months. The electricity expense then is a statement of profit loss item, and all it means is we've just increased the charge that we're going to put through to the P&L. Okay then, so let's have a look now at example 2. We're just going to take it that little bit further, okay? So continuing with example 1, what we need to do is we need to calculate the electricity expense for the year. So basically, what is the electricity charge for 2019 within this example? And this is more exam focused. This is kind of where we're looking at in what we'd expect to do in the exam. So basically then, let's have a look at what we need to do. So we need to obviously deal with the bank payment of 5,000, and we then need to deal with the accrued expense that we've just calculated in example 1. So the first thing first then, and I can't remember, we just had a bank payment, didn't we? It didn't give us a date, so I won't put a date in. So I'm just going to put bank, okay? And we've got the 5,000. So I'm debiting the electricity expense because I would have been crediting the bank. So once again, I've gone back to basics with my double entry. What we need to do now is we now need to enter the journal entry for the accrued expense. So we've done the journal entry up here. So I'm debiting the electricity expense, crediting the accrued expenses in the financial position. So all I'm going to do here, so this terms of date, so this accrual will always happen at the reporting financial year. So this is the 31st of December 2019, and I've got my accrued expense, okay, or expenses of 1,000, okay. So now I need to do the other side. So I always start with my debits first. So in my accrued expense, which is in the financial position, date again, so it will be the 31st December 2019. I'm just going to put electricity. So at least I know where it's gone to, and I've got the 1,000. Okay. So the question is, what is the electricity expense for the year? So effectively, I need to balance off the electricity expense account. So here we go. So 5 plus 1 gives me 6,000. That's 6,000. And what I do know, okay, is at the end of the financial year, so the 31st of December, I am going to transfer to the statement of profit and loss, or to the TB as such, £6,000, because that is the electricity expense for this financial year. So key things here is obviously identifying the correct date. So the correct dates we're looking at here is what dates are you going to be recording these accrued expenses at the end of the year, and obviously what the dates that you're going to be choosing to transfer the expense through to the TB statement of profit and loss. Okay. Obviously, in terms of the accrued expenses, we've got the 31st of December sat there. If you remember, with financial position balances, they don't go anywhere. So that 1,000 balance will be 1,000 balance on the 1st of January 2020. However, though, with the statement of profit and loss figures, once we've transferred it through at the end of the financial year, come to 2020, electricity, we're going to start from scratch. Okay, so that's absolutely fundamental. So what we need to have a look at now then is obviously, we've got an accrual of £1,000 from 2019, but what we're going to do with it in 2020, because we are going to actually at some point receive an invoice which will include that accrued expense. So we need to do something. So what we're going to have a look at now then is actually deal with the opening and closing accrual. So we're kind of getting closer to how to deal with this in the exam. So, as I said, in example 1, we've accrued for £1,000 electricity expense for the year ending 31st December 2019. It's sat there in the financial position. It's not going to go away. So if you think about it, 31st of December, I have £1,000 in my bank account. 1st of January, I will still have £1,000 in my bank account. That balance doesn't go. So we need to do something with that £1,000 accrued expense sat there in the FP. So let's have a look at the information in a little bit more detail. So it's saying the actual invoice for November, December and including January 2020 was received on the 13th of February. And actually the bill that we got was 1,800. So if I'm doing quick calculations in my head, I think we've probably underestimated the electricity charge, but it doesn't matter because we're not going to get it spot on. And I'm not going to go back and change the accounts. That's all being signed off. I'm just going to process this 1,800 in this financial year. So because we've received this invoice on the 13th of February, all that means is that whoever gets the invoice is going to process it through the nominal ledgers. But we have problems, okay? So as I already said, £1,000 of that 1,800 bill we have received relates to 2019, okay? So if we don't do anything with that £1,000, it means we will be accounting for that £1,000 also in 2020, which is wrong, okay? Because actually, of that bill we received, only £800 of it relates to the current financial year. So essentially what we need to do is we need to correct it, because otherwise we're going to put the electricity charge too high. So if we don't do anything with that £1,000, we're going to have 1,800 sat there in the P&L, which means that the electricity account is going to be too high, which means our profit will be understated. So we need to correct it. So what do we need to do? So we need to reverse out that £1,000 electricity charge at the beginning of 2020. So remember, examiner said we keep getting mixed up with our dates, particularly with our reversing journal dates, okay? So we need to make sure. So if we put an accrual through on the 31st of December 2019, it means I will reverse it out on the 1st of January 2020. So if anybody who's working in an accountancy and you do month-end or year-end transactions, or journals should I say, I bet there's some of you that are doing reversing journals, and all that means is you process that journal for £1,000 electricity, and when the 1st of January comes into play, it automatically reverses it out for you, so you don't physically have to do it. However, there for us in this exam, we have to do it manually. The other thing as well that we need to take into account is we do need to obviously post the electricity bill that we received on the 13th of February for the 1,800. Okay then, so let's have a look then what we need to do. So what I'm going to do first of all is I'm going to deal with the reversal. So all I'm doing here, so if I just go back, there we go, there's my journal entry, I'm reversing it. So I'm going to debit the accrued expenses and I'm going to credit the electricity expense. All I'm doing is reversing out that journal, but it's the 1st of January 2020 that I'm going to be doing it. Okay, so let me go and do this. So all I'm going to do here is debit my accrued expenses, which is in the statement of financial position for the 1,000. So I'm getting rid of it so that my balance as of the 1st of January, once I've posted this, is back to 0. And then I'm going to credit the electricity expense in the statement of profit and loss for the 1,000. So even before I've done anything, I'm actually got a negative 1,000. Okay, so if I'm going to post this into the relevant nominal ledgers, what we can see here, so this is all going to be happening on the 1st of January 2020. Okay, so this is going to be my accrued expense for 1,000, and then 1st of January, so remember dates, examiner's report, we've got the electricity expense, we've got 1,000. Okay, so there we go, we've dealt with that. So what I need to do now is I now need to post the actual bill we received on the 13th of February. So all I'm going to do here is debit the electricity expense, because I need to account for the electricity charge. So the electricity expense, excuse my handwriting, for the 1,800, and I'm obviously going to be crediting the bank or payables depending on how we're paying it for the 1,800. Okay, so if we go back to our nominal ledgers, and I think probably just to save time, I'll just go back up here. All I'm going to do here is just go and post that electricity expense. So let me just do that in a different colour. So what we got here, 13th of February 2020. We've obviously got the bank or payables. I'm not 100% sure how we've paid it. In the exam it will be clear, and I'm going to put that 1,800. So what we can see now, if I was to balance off the electricity expense in the P&L, we have got a debit charge of 800, which is the correct charge for that particular accounting period, because of that 1,800, 1,000 of it was last year. We've already accounted for it, and therefore by reversing that journal out in the the new financial year, it takes into account that 1,000 accrued expense. So that's why it's so important that we know our opening and our closing accruals. Okay, so hopefully that's kind of seeing the example and working it through to see why and what we are doing. Okay then, so my little key, this is fundamental to your exam, because you are not only going to be examined on where does the expense needs to go within the nominal ledger, within the expense account, you need to know your opening and your closing accruals. So the AAT refer to it as a reversal. So when you see the word reversal in task 3, it means you're reversing your accrual or your prepayment. So an opening accrual, your balance brought down, is your accrual charge from the previous reporting period, where your closing accrual, that's your balance carried down. So hopefully you can think about that, when you've been dealing with balances brought down and carried down, when you've been dealing with other nominal ledger accounts, you are looking at the accrual charge for the current reporting period. This is fundamental because they're going to be giving you certain figures and you need to understand, am I looking at an opening accrual, so that's from last year, or am I looking at a closing accrual which relates to this year? And if you can get your head around that, then you're almost there with your accruals and prepayments. So let's have a look at example 3 then. And this kind of ties everything together in terms of our expenditure and accruals. So, electricity account for the year ending 31st December 2020 was as follows. So the opening balance for electricity accrued at the 1st of January 2020 was 1,000. So kind of continuing on maybe from the last example. The bank payment there, however, has changed. So the bank payment made during the year was 5,900, and included in this amount was a payment of 1,950 that related to 3 months that ended at the 31st of October. So we have got no electricity bill, okay, that we have received for November and December 2020. There's a little bit of deja vu. We had the same situation in 2019, exactly the same in obviously 2020, in that we've come to the year end and we have got no electricity bill for November and December. So the question is we need to write up the electricity expense clearly showing the reversal of the opening accrual and the closing accrual for the year ending 31st December. But what we also need to know is how much are we going to charge to the electricity expense account that's going to show up in the TB and the statement of P&L for the financial year. So once again, James, I'm going to ask you to help me here. So come on then, students, okay? What do you think the accrual charge should be, using the information that we've got here in this particular question, for the 2 months? What do we think the November and the December accrual charge should be? So once again, I'll give you a few moments to get your calculators, have a little thing, and then just obviously post your answers in the chat panel. And then obviously James will give me everyone's comments. Not everybody, but a summarise.
We'll just wait for those to come in, and just want to say well done to everyone. I don't think we had one incorrect answer on the last question, so well done everybody.
Yeah, it's fantastic, isn't it? And I'm being a bit mean. I obviously keep saying that I'm actually, testing students' knowledge, but it's good. It keeps everybody entertained, everybody on the toes.
We have our first one in. Just wait for a few more to come up.
This is when I start to panic. Think, have I calculated it correctly?
Everyone seems to be in agreement. They're looking at around £1,300, although we just had one in at 1,500.
Right, I can see where you're coming from, because you the 1,500 is probably taking the 5,900. For me, I've got the 1,300. Once again, guys, in reality, it doesn't have to be precise, and at the end of the day, the auditor would come up and say, how have you calculated it? And as long as you can justify that calculation, you'll be fine. For us in the exam, though, and the numbers I'm going to take is, because of that 5,900, the information given to me saying of that 5,900, 1,950 relates to the last 3 months, then I'm going to take that 1,950. So all I'm doing is taking the 1,950. Let me get my pen out. So the 1,950, I've then divided it by the 3 months. So I get a charge for 1 month. That comes back at 650. I need to accrue for 2 months, and that comes back at 1,300. So from what I can, from what James is telling me, which is really good, because one of the things that the examiner pointed out was that we weren't very good at calculating and prorating the calculations. So it sounds to me we're getting there. So that's fantastic. So yeah, I agree, it's 1,300. So we know that the closing accrual for this financial year is 1,300. I've got an opening accrual from the previous year of 1,000. So what we need to do is put all of this information into the exam. So before you all start screaming at the screen going, Sally, I still can't remember the debits and credits, that's fine. I've still got my little trick up the sleeve. I'm keeping you in suspense in terms of, once I've shown you how to remember how to deal with it, you'll be sat there going, oh, that is fantastic. Okay, so let's start with the opening accrual then. So the opening accrual means we counted for it last year, and we just need to obviously reverse it out this year, which means it will be a credit in the expense account. So 1st of January, remembering dates are important, we are looking at the accrued expense from the previous year. Okay, so I always say that's my brought down figure, and I've got 1,000. I've then got the bank payment, so there was no date again, because obviously it would have been various invoices that would have been received during the year. So I'm just going to put bank because I am crediting the bank and therefore debiting the electricity expense. So I've got the 5,900. And now I've got the accrued expense for the current year, which means I need to account for it. I need to increase the expense charge in this financial year. So in terms of dates, we will be looking at the 31st of December 2020. And this time I've got my accrued expense carried down. Okay, and this is the 1,300. So I've correctly dealt with my opening and my closing accrual. What I need to do now, and this will be expected of you in your exam, is what is the charge we are going to put through to the P&L. So it's effectively going to be the balancing figure. So if I just do my quickly adding up, so I get 7,200, 7,200, and then all I'm going to do now is the date that we will transfer all of this to the P&L is the last date in the reporting period, so the 31st of December. So the 31st of December 2020, we have the transfer to the statement of profit and loss, and it will be the balancing figure, which I get to be 6,200. So by doing what I've done is effectively answered one of the exam questions. It's knowing where things belong and being able to recognise how many months I need to account for in this financial year, certainly when we're looking at accrued expenses. Okay then, so hopefully everybody is happy with this. One thing I just wanted to point out is I will share my notes with you, so don't worry about frantically having to write all of this down. I will share this, we'll obviously share this with you, so I'll hand this over to the AAT. So what I want to move on to now then is I want to have a look at prepayments. So we've looked at where actually we've used the expense, but we've not actually accounted for it within our financial statements. The prepayment is the opposite, is we've paid for it, but we haven't used it. So how do we deal with that? So let's have a look then at prepayments in a little bit more detail. Okay, so here we go. Back to the top. So as I said, prepaid expenses, what are they? So as I've said, relates to an expense which has been accounted for in the current reporting period, but actually relates to the next financial accounting period. So we've paid it in advance, but we don't, or we shouldn't account for it. So common examples from, working perspective, insurance. We pay insurance up front, and that insurance charge may not coincide with the financial year. And also rent, we might not be paying it on a monthly basis, might have to pay it yearly, or might have to pay it quarterly. It depends on what that contract is. So what we need to do now is let's have a look at an example. So we have a business, and once again we're gone back a year. We're in the year end of 31st of December 2019, and on the 1st of January 2019 the company decides to change their motor insurance, and they pay £2,880 up front for the period the 1st of January 2019 to the 30th of June 2020. Okay, so quite clear to see we've paid some in advance. Some of that relates to the next financial year. So the question that we need to ask ourselves is we need to calculate the year-end prepayment. So how much of that 2,880 relates to next year? Okay, so we effectively, if I think about it, we've got January to December, 12 months, January to June, 6 months. We have effectively paid for, try and get a colour, 18 months. Okay. So the question is, how much relates to the current financial year? How much relates to the next financial year? So what we've got here is 2019 and 2020. So fingers on your calculators, what I'm looking for is how much of that 2,880 relates to next year. So how much of it relates to 2020. So once again, James, I'm keeping you busy today as well, aren't I? So if you can let me know what the answers are coming through the chat panel.
Yep, I'll just wait for this to come through. Whilst we're waiting, we've got one question that wants to know, is this going to be part of the synoptic exam?
Yes, it could be. So AVBK does come part of the synoptic exam. So accruals and prepayments could be examined, yeah. Sorry.
Okay, got lots of answers coming in now. And so far, I can see that pretty much everyone has said the same thing. And they are saying £960.
Yay! It must mean I'm right because of everybody else who's coming up with 960. Yeah, absolutely spot on. So very similar approach to what we've done with dealing with the accruals. So I've taken the 2,880, I've divided it by the 18 months, so I get a charge for 1 month. And you know, at the end of the day, we'll probably find the motor insurance is going to be the same amount month on month, and that gives me a charge of 160. Okay, so in terms of how much of that 2,880 relates to next year, so all we're doing here is I'm looking at 6 months. So all I'm going to do is take that 160 monthly charge, times it by 6, and that does give me 960, which means the charge for this year, 2019, is 2,880 less than 960, and that gives me a charge of 1,920. So even before I've actually kind of started to think of the solution and what needs to go where, I'm already doing the sums in my head. And I would always say that to you guys in your exam, is you're going to be given the figures, so don't be frightened to actually start thinking about how many months, what's the amount, because that will help you when you come to actually answer the question. Okay then, so let's have a look then in terms of what we're doing. So it's calculate the year-end prepayment. Well, we've already done that. It is 960, so well done everybody. The question is we now need to account for it, so we need to put through a journal entry. So the question is what is that figure going to be? So what's happening? Well, we've received the invoice for 2,880 and we've processed it. We will have gone debit motor insurance, credit, however we're going to pay for it. So sat there in the motor insurance account is 2,880, but we know 960 of it relates to the next financial year. So we need to reduce the expense, okay? So we need to reduce that expense, and hopefully you're all shouting at your screens, you're all saying, Sal, it's a credit, and you're right, we're going to credit the motor insurance expense account. So yeah, I'm going to credit the motor insurance expense account for the 960. That therefore means I must be debiting something, which happens to be the prepaid expense in the financial position. So if you're not used to it, financial position is your balance sheet. Okay, so that's the 960. So in terms of that prepaid expense, okay, this will be a current asset. So accruals are liabilities, prepayment for expenditure are assets. Why? There's a couple of ways we can think about it. My way of thinking about it is I ring up on the 31st of December 2019, maybe a little bit late, and I ring up the insurance company saying, not happy, I'm cancelling it. And in theory, I don't think it will happen, but in theory the insurance company should say, yeah, Sal, okay, I take what you're saying, we will give you that 6 months that you've prepaid, we'll give you it back. Okay, so that's how I look at it. I keep things there. Well, actually, if I was to cancel it, that money should come back to me. Another way to think about it is, well, actually, we've spent 960 and we've obviously erased next year. So if we put an asset of 960, it contras the bank. So we're kind of correcting the bank, but we're not actually putting it into the bank account because we need to reflect what has gone through the bank account. So we're just going to counter it with the asset in the financial position. So there's different ways of looking at it, but for expenditure, accruals are liabilities, prepayments are assets. So let's move on. We need to take this example out a little bit further. So we're going to continue with example 5. So continue with what we've just looked at in example 4. We need to calculate the motor expense for the year. So we kind of already done that, but what we'll do is by posting the relevant journal adjustments into the expense account, we will see how that motor expense of 1,920 is shown. So first thing first is obviously we have the bank. So on the 1st of January 2019, we've obviously got the bank payment for that 2,880. So we got that. That's happened. We can't argue with it. We have been correct. We've processed it correctly. But the year end, we know 6 months of that relates to the next financial year, and we know we need to reduce that expense account. So, as I said, we will be crediting the expense account, but we will be putting a debit in the prepaid expense. And I always post my debits first. So, we're now looking at the 31st of December because it relates to the year end adjustment. And I've got my, it's going to be my motor expense because that's where the other side of the journal entry is going to. And I'm looking at 960. And then obviously my motor insurance expense account, 31st of December. We have got the prepaid expense. Okay. And we've got the 960. So how do I get to the 1920? Well, I've got to balance the account off. So 2880. 2880. So it means date important. 31st of December 2019. I am going to transfer the balancing figure to the P&L, and that happens to be, because I've already calculated it, which was the 1920. And that's how I get there doing the journal entry, so correctly posting the information within the nominal ledgers. Okay, so hopefully that's helping you immensely. So, same problem that we had with the accruals is, well, 2019, I've got that prepaid expense of 960, but actually it relates to 2020. So I need to account for it in 2020. So how am I going to deal with it? So we're coming back down to the opening and closing prepayments. So example 4, as I said, we got a prepayment of 960, but that relates to the, to the year ending the 31st December 2020. So I need to get it in to the 2020 account. But on the 1st of July 2020, we have paid in full an annual insurance of 2,400. So not only, being mean here, are we having to deal with the prepayment from last year that I need to get into the accounts for this financial year, but I've also got a prepayment at the end of the financial year that I need to take out so that I can account for it for next year. So there's quite a lot going on here. So as I said, problem 960, we need to account for it, and also we need to get the correct P&L charge through for the financial year for this motor insurance. So we've got 3 things to deal with. 1, we need to reverse out the 960. Okay. 2, we need to obviously account for the bill that we received on the 1st of July. And 3, we've got that prepayment that we need to deal with at the end of December. So we're going to look at this bit by bit. I'm not going to do it all together because we could get lost. So what we've got here is, first of all, we need to reverse out the motor insurance. So if we're doing this at work, it would automatically do it because we'd have created a reversing journal, but we haven't done that. So all I'm going to do is take that journal and reverse it. So this time I'm going to debit the motor insurance expense because I need that 960 for the charge for this financial year, and I'm obviously going to be crediting the prepaid expense in the FP because I need to get rid of it. It's no longer there. So let's do that first of all. Oops. So as I was saying, we are going to obviously debit the motor insurance expense. So motor insurance expense, okay, which was the 960, and then the accrued expense, no, start again, Sal, prepaid expense, sorry, first mistake, so prepaid expense of 960, okay. So in terms of what's happening, in terms of the P&L and the FP, in terms of the prepaid expense, don't forget that that 960 from the previous year obviously will be brought down in the current year. So we've got, so on the 1st of January 2020, we will have that prepaid expense, okay, of 960. Because remember, those balances don't go away. So that 960 debit on the 31st of December is going to be a debit on the 1st of January. So that's from the previous year. So what I'm going to do now is post that journal entry. So dates again, so we're looking at the 1st of January 2020, and I've obviously got my prepaid expense. So remember, the prepaid expense is the other side of the journal entry, so I'm debiting the motor insurance, first of the 960, so yes, I've got the charge in there. And then obviously in the financial position, 1st of January, I've got motor expense, or motor insurance should I say, of 960. So it means 1st of January, I've no longer got that prepaid expense sat in my current assets. It's gone, it's disappeared. So the second journal we need to do here is we need to account for the bill on the 1st of July. So I'm going to debit the motor insurance expense. And that was for, I think it was 2,400. Yep, it was. So 2,400, and I'm now going to credit, obviously, the bank, or however I'm going to pay for it. I'll say it's bank because it did say pay, 2,400. So in terms of how we're going to post these journal entries, just to save time, I was going to do it all individually, but I'm going to save time. I'm now going to post it here. So on the 1st of July, 2020, I've got that payment of 2,400. Okay. So I've dealt with that. I'm not going to post the bank because we can all imagine me putting a credit to the bank account. So the third journal is we need to account for the prepayment that sits within the 2,400. So James, I'm going to need you again very quickly, almost finished, is of that 2,400, guys, okay? So we're going from 1st of July to the 31st of December, okay? But we've also paid from the 1st of January 2021 to the 30th of June 2021. How much of this is a prepayment? Answers on your postcard and then send over to James via the chat panel.
Thanks, Sally. Yep, we'll just wait for those to come through. Again, I don't think we had anybody give us an incorrect answer on the last question. So I've got high expectations of our audience this time round.
So luckily I don't put you on the spot, James.
Yeah, I don't think I do as well as anyone that's been watching so far. They're coming in now, and we are getting pretty similar across the board. Okay, so the answer we're getting from pretty much everyone is 1,200.
Yeah, absolutely spot on. So so of that 2,400, it's 12 months. I just need 6/12 of it, so that does come back at 1,200. So well done, everybody. So all I'm going to do is take that 2,400 times by 6/12, so divide by 12 times by 6. That will come back at 1,200. So 1,200 relates to this year. 1,200 relates to next year. So my journal entry therefore will be, and I'll just go down here, is I'm going to debit the prepaid expense because obviously it's an asset because we've paid it in advance in the statement of financial position. So that's the 1,200. And then I'm going to credit the motor insurance for 1,200. So all I'm going to do now is post that into my journal entry. So I'll just get a different colour here. Go there. So in terms of the prepaid expense in the financial position, what I would have on here, so remembering the dates, we are looking at the 31st of December because it's a financial year end accounting adjustment. So I would have my motor insurance, okay, of 1,200. So when I balance it all down, I still have a debit of 1,200, which would go into the TB as a debit because it is an asset. And then in the motor insurance account, obviously 31st of December, 2020, I'm obviously sending this off to prepaid expense because it relates to next financial year of 1,200. So all I'm doing here is I now need to calculate what I'm going to transfer to the P&L. So I have already calculated these figures, so I believe that's 3,360. That also has to be 3,360, which means on the 31st of December 2020, we will transfer the balancing figure to the statement of profit and loss. Okay, so this would be a debit in the TB because it will be a debit in the P&L because it is an expense, and the balancing figure is 2,160. Okay, so essentially by dealing with that motor insurance expense account, we've actually answered probably one of the exam questions that you would get to see in task 3. So very quickly, the key. So accruals, opening, closing, fundamental. We also need to know it for prepayment. So an opening prepayment is the prepayment that relates to the last or the previous reporting period, where your closing prepayment relates to the current reporting period. So I've promised you how to remember it, okay? So what I find with students is you can't remember. So you get in the exam and you're looking at the information, you're going, oh God, I've got an accrual I've got accrual brought forward. Does that go on the debit or the credit side? And you have that conversation with yourself. You're having that argument with yourself. You think, is it a debit? Is it a credit? All logic goes out the window. So I want to say I came up with it and didn't come up with it, okay? But we've got a way for you to remember. And the way to remember, when I go to it, everyone's looking, is PAPA. Okay, so how do I know? So when we are looking at expenditure, so expenses, whether it's accrued expense or prepaid expense, I know that expenses are debits in the TB, which means my PAPA will always start on the debit side. That is fundamental, because when we move on to income, and I will quickly go through it because time is ticking, then PAPA comes on the other side. It'll start on the credit side. So effectively then, your PAPA goes like that. So what we can see is that we've got the top bit, okay? So your prepayment brought down and your accruals brought down goes on the top bit. But the prepayment is on the debit side and the accrual is on the credit side. Because the prepayment brought down is from last year, we need to account for it in this financial year. The accrual brought down means we accounted for it last year. I don't want to account for it this year, so I put it there so that it will obviously offset it. To the bottom, so what we've got down here is I've got my accruals and prepayments here. The accruals carry down, so the accruals charged for this year goes on the debit side, where your prepayment carry down will go on the credit side. Don't forget though, that we also just need to put in the bank transaction. So we've got obviously the bank and then the transfer to the P&L. So the key for you lot, and you still need to know the why bit. Why does the prepayment brought down goes on the debit and the accrual brought down goes on the credit? You still need to understand it. But this takes that argument out when you're in the exam, because all you need to do literally, and whether I am teaching ACCA, CIMA, Chartered or ACCA, and there's a accrual and prepayment question, the first thing I do, just get my pen up, literally you all laugh, I go, right, I'm looking at a accrual and prepayment expense, right, PAPA, okay, and it takes that thinking out, so I know that if I've got prepayment for last year, it goes at the top, I know it's on the debit side. If I've got accrual for the current year, I know it's going to go on the debit side of my T account, and it just takes that thinking away. So James, I'm just going to ask everybody a question. How does everybody feel about PAPA? Do they think that's going to help them immensely? I'm looking for a yes or a no.
Okay, I'll just give it a second and we'll wait for those to come in. Whilst we're waiting, we did have one question on the previous example. Was Hannah asked, wouldn't the detail in the PPE account would be motor expenses?
No, the PPE, I'm assuming you're talking about property, plant and equipment. So PPE is all to do with fixed assets. So the motor expenses is day-to-day running expenses, so would appear as an expense within the statement of profit and loss. So no, motor expenses is not PPE because it's a day-to-day running expense. So hopefully that helps.
Great, thank you. Yeah, we've got a majority of people saying yes. Emma says that she doesn't quite understand PAPA. So maybe if Emma, you send us a direct message, we can connect you up and maybe give you a bit more detail around that.
Absolutely, I'm fine with that. So really, it's just to help you where your accruals and prepayments go. So the top bit here, that relates to your accruals and prepayments from the previous year. Your accruals and prepayments at the bottom part of your T account relates to the accruals and prepayments for the current year. Okay, and that's all it does. It's just helping you to know where everything goes. Okay, so let's now quickly have a look at sample assessment 1. So there's not a massive amount we're going to do here. So in terms of the first part, so we know it's 19 marks, but it's split into different parts of the question. So the first part of the question is basically saying, right, this task is all about ledger accounting, including accruals and prepayments and applying ethical principles, which is what I've already mentioned earlier. But what it does ask us is enter the figures given in the table below in the appropriate trial balance columns. Do not enter zeros in unused column cells, and do not enter figures as negatives. So they're giving you the instructions, follow the instructions. So if I decide the accrual expense is a debit, I'm not going to put a 0 in the credit. I'm just literally going to put the figures where they should be. So what I can see here is I can see accrued expenses. And what happens is students see the word expense. Your brain automatically goes, oh, that's a debit. No. Ignore the expense bit. I can see I've got an accrual, and the accrual is a liability, which means I'm looking at a credit of $8.50. Okay, so just watch out for that. It's so easy to see the word expense and automatically think it's a debit. Carriage inwards, that's a cost to the business. That's the cost that we're going to incur for goods being delivered from our suppliers. So it is an expense. Expenses are debits, and therefore that will go on the debit side. Discounts allowed. Oh, we've got discounts received and discounts allowed. The way in which I remember it is that when I was obviously learning accountancy many months ago, I remember that discounts received has an I in it, and I always remember discounts received, because it's got an I, means it's income, and therefore discounts allowed was the opposite, and therefore was a debit. And that's how I remembered it, because it was an expense. So discount allowed is an expense. It's the expense that we're allowing our customers to take that settlement. So it's costing us effect. So that's 1420 on the debit side. And then prepaid income, very quickly we will have a look at that. But it means we've received income in advance. So it's the opposite to prepayments. So actually it's a liability, because we've received the money but not done what we should have been doing. So therefore it's a liability, and therefore it's a credit, okay, of 975. The bit I'm looking at is this bit here, okay. So hopefully by doing PAPA and stuff we should be okay. So very quickly then, what it's saying here is that we're looking at vehicle running expenses for the year, okay. The cash book for the year shows payments for running expenses of 9,468. And this includes the following payments for road fund licenses. So we've got the 1st of January to the 31st of December 2007. So we've got 516. And we've got the 1st of January X7 to the 31st of March X8 405. So the question that we're asking here is we need to calculate the value of the adjustment required for the vehicle running expenses as at the 31st of March X7. So we've paid 9,468. And within that 9,468, we've got 516 that relates to a license from the 1st of January to the 31st of December. And then we've got one that relates from the 1st of April to the 31st of March. So guys, can you quickly calculate how much we have prepaid for this financial year? What will be the adjustment for that prepayment be within this calculation, within this question?
Okay, we'll just wait for those to come in. I've got another question for you. Will an opening accrual always be balanced on day 1 of the next financial year?
Yes, absolutely. It will always be the first day of the next financial reporting period. Absolutely. Or if you were looking at doing, so I know lots of companies will account for accruals and prepayments on a monthly basis. So where are we today? We're in June. So let's say you put in a month-end accrual on the 31st of May, then it will be reversed out on the 1st of June. So it's always accruals and prepayments last day of the financial year, or month-end, first day of the next financial year, or first day of the next month.
Okay, I've had 2 answers in so far, but they are quite different. So let's give it a few more seconds and see what else we get in.
So okay, it's fine. I'm giving them the AAT sample assessment question. So a bit difficult because obviously we've got 2 figures here that we need to take account. The examples we were going through are only 1. So the key thing is the year. So we're going from the 1st of this is when it gets me 1st of April X6 to the 31st of March X7. So what you're doing is you're looking at these figures here and say, okay, how many months in the first one relates to the next financial year, and how many months of the second one relates to the next financial year.
Okay, so the majority of people have come back with 387 or 386. I don't know if that's a rounding issue. And then we've got a couple of people coming in with 101 and 25 pence.
Right then, okay, so let's have a look. So the first one, you're spot on. We're going from the 1st of January to the 31st of December X7. So 1st of January to the 31st of March relates to this financial year. So that means, okay, that we've got a prepayment from the 1st of April X7 to the 31st of December X7. So, you know, there's nothing wrong with getting the old fingers out in the exam. So if we do April to December, we are looking at 9 months. Okay, so everybody has been correct. So all I'm doing is taking that 516, I will times it by 9/12, so divide by 12 times by 9, and you come back with a figure of 387. So if you got 386, it sounds like it's a bit of a, maybe put a figure in correctly in the calculator, but it's nothing too wrong. In terms of the second one, we're starting from the 1st of April X7. That relates to next year. This does not relate to this financial year, because the financial year expense or the financial year is up until the 31st of March X7, and whereas this one starts on the 1st of April X7. So key and fundamental is date. So actually the full £405 is a prepayment. So the key thing is dates. What is the financial year end, and what period are we looking at when we're looking at these payments and when they've been obviously being paid. So actually the total amount of this adjustment is going to be 792. So just very quickly, guys, is everybody happy with the second prepayment of the £405? Can we all now see it's the full amount, the £405?
We'll just wait for those answers to come in.
A big yes, hopefully big yes in the chat panel.
I don't know if we've gone a bit shy, but we're not actually getting any comments in at this point.
Okay, we'll continue. So basically all we're doing is we've got a prepayment of 792 that we will need to adjust for within the vehicle running expense. So the second...
Sorry, Sally, they're coming in now. Yeah, everyone's saying yes, and yes.
Yay! So basically then, as I said, we now need to take that 792, we need to take the payment of 9468, and we need to obviously put it into the T account, okay, and obviously determine how much we're going to transfer to the statement of profit and loss. So because I know I'm looking at expenses and I know I've got a prepayment, all I'm going to do is my little T account, and then by the side I'm going, right, okay, in my own mind I've got my little papa, so I've got a P, I've got an A, I've got a P, and I've got an A. So I know that the top two, the P and the A, relates to the prepayments accruals from the previous year, and then anything that relates to this year, whether it's accrual or prepayment, it goes in the bottom part of my T account. Now, one of the things that the examiner said in the weaknesses is that students doesn't calculate the transfers to P&L correctly because they forget to take the opening balance. And the reason why students forget that is because the examiner is already telling us that there is a prepaid expense from the previous year, okay? So what we all forget to do is we all forget to take that 840 when we're doing the calculations. It is so easy. So please look at the information in the T account that's given to you in your exam. If there is something already there, it means the examiner's saying to you, by the way, don't forget to take that into account when you're obviously calculating the charge to your P&L. So let's then deal with the information. So what we've got to do first of all is the bank. We know during that financial year, we have paid out £9,468 in relation to the vehicle running expenses. So I'm going to say it's the bank, and I'm going to say it's the 948 9468. Okay. And what I do know is that I have a prepayment for the end of the year. So it's a carry down. It relates to the next financial year. So I've got my little papper. Just reduce my screen. I've got my little papper, and I know if I've got a figure that relates to the current year and I know it's a prepayment, I therefore know it's going to go on the credit side. Why? Because of that 9468, £792 relates to the next year. So I have to reduce my expense account for it because it doesn't relate to this financial year. So all I'm going to do down here is I'm just going to put my prepaid expense, the one that I've just calculated, the 792. So if you were to get that figure incorrect in the first part of the question, I'm assuming, I can't say for definite, but I'm assuming that because you got it wrong in the first part, but you correctly put it into the T account in the second part of the question, you would get marked correct here. Okay, so if you come up with a different figure, let's say you come up with 800 and you put 800 here, you would get marked for it because you've calculated incorrectly, but you've actually carried it through correctly, what we call follow through marks. So all I need to do now is balance my account off. Now you can see you've got 840 here, which means it actually does the adding up for you. So I will have to do it myself because I'm doing this manually. So when I add this up, that comes to 10308. That comes to 10308. Which means the figure I'm going to transfer to the P&L is the balancing figure, which is 9516. What I can see, there are 6 marks. So you're going to get a mark for correctly identifying the nominal. You'll get a mark for the amount, okay? And that's the same for all of the transactions here, and that's where your 6 marks comes from, okay? So there is a detailed analysis of accruals and prepayments using Papa. I'm conscious of time and I'm going to stop here, but I will include this within the material. But I do have a page for prepaid and accrual income, so in terms of what the journal entry is, and then I have the Papa as well. So what you've got here, you've got income is P&L, and I know all incomes are credit, so which means my Papa starts on the credit side in terms of spelling the Papa out on the T account, and it goes like that. Okay, so I'm going to finish the session for today. So hopefully you've found that really, really helpful. So key things is dates, being able to identify the number of months that have been prepaid and accrued. In terms of dates of your reversals, it's always, the carry down is the last day of the financial year end. The brought down will be the first of the next financial year end. So these are really, really key. Key thing is practice. Practice will make you perfect. And I say there's no pain, there's no passes. Okay, so I'm happy to stay online if anybody else has got any more questions. So over to you, James.
Thank you, Sally. Yeah, that's great. We'll give it a couple of seconds and we'll try and get through a few questions, hopefully, before we have to end the live video. Just want to wait for this to come in. Anyone that's a Kaplan student, what can they... what services do you guys offer in terms of being able to practice this sort of activity?
So obviously they've got the exam kits where we've got lots of questions that are written in the exam style. So there's lots of questions they can practice with. They've also got all their resources on my Kaplan. So ranging from knowledge checks to progress tests. We've also got case study. Which is fantastic because it kind of takes like real life experience and we put it into a case study and they all have to, and we kind of like trying to resemble what would happen in the workplace. And there's 2 case studies. One of them is obviously is really, really good and it would help them for the exams. And we've also obviously got the mock exams as well. So we've got mock exams in our textbooks. We've got a mock exam in our exam kit, and we've also got the mock exams that are on my Kaplan. So for my Kaplan students, we have got so many resources. Lots and lots of things for students to practice with. And anybody else, studying with other training providers, the key thing is to practice as many questions as possible. And don't forget, you've also got the 2 sample assessments on my AAT. You've also got the green light test. So there's more than enough resources to practice with.
Great, thank you very much. Right, we're not getting any more questions in, but we're getting lots of people saying many thanks. Thank you very much for going through that. So it seems to have been really, really helpful. Let's have a high five for everyone in there. There we go. Okay, thank you very much, Sally, for your time today. That's been really useful.
Fantastic.